up here next Sunday for the first service, and we will be starting a new study in Genesis. And put on your seatbelt. It's going to be quite a ride as we go through that. It's a wonderful book. It just look at the excitement that it even opens up with. I mean, it's a great book. But today, through prayer, I decided to do a topical lesson today, because we are going to be faced with petitions to sign and questions to ask and defense of our positions more and more as the day comes, because the Supreme Court's pending decision was leaked. This does not mean that they cannot change their mind. They still have to sign on to what they agreed to. And if they change their mind, it goes reverse. And I think this was one of the reasons it was leaked. It was to put pressure on the Supreme Court justice not to sign on to their original decision. That's my opinion. We don't know why it was leaked, but to me, that's what makes sense. The decision was to leave it up to the states on abortion. And I have never been in more conversations about this subject than I have since that decision's been leaked. I have recently had somebody who tends to state that he belongs to the same political party as I do, but he's very pro-abortion. And in his statement, he made this comment: "One life begins is irrelevant." Scary. Life, no more, to those who support abortion, the idea of if that child is alive or not is irrelevant. I remember when R. V. Wade passed. There was a lot of discussion going around. And the discussion was, when does life begin? That was the big question. And after R. V. Wade, it was, hey, no abortion after the first trimester. Who here is old enough to remember that? And that decision was made because they figured that's when life began, was after the first trimester. I don't know how they figured that out, but that's what they stated. Then another case called with Planned Parenthood versus Casey, they said, no, it's at viability, and it's up to the states to prove viability for that. Otherwise, it's constitutional to have an abortion.
I know a 30-year-old.
Well, we're going to get into that, brother. We're going to so get into that. But that term viability is arbitrary. What does that mean? But the question still was based around, when does life begin? Now, of course, they're getting arbitrary answers of that, and I'm hoping we can answer that, but there's some facts you need to know. And first of all, I want to wish every mother in here happy birthing person day. No, happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day. Got a wonderful, gorgeous baby in the back. Her name is Grace. She and her mother, Cassandra. I made an assumption that I thought I'd clarify. Cassandra in the back, and let's keep Selah House of Prayer or House of Hope in prayer. I do want to say that next weekend in Monroe there is a Walk for Life. I know it sounds like an announcement. Please participate. I'm looking for ways to participate. Cam, I'll be talking to you about that after service. But get with Cam if you can participate. This is standing up for life. Next thing I want to point out is that you're going to be approached by petitions. I was approached by one the other day. I dropped my wife off to go shopping inside a food mart. I had somewhere else to go, just down the strip mall. Came out. Person came out and says, "Do you want to sign this parental rights bill?" And I've warned you about this before. This protects parents' rights. And that was the opening pitch for signing this petition. To anybody who would take the time to read what the petition was actually for, it had nothing to do with parents' rights. It's actually taken away the parents' rights because it would take away the child. It was for a bill or a ballot initiative to make abortion in this state a constitutional right. Now, as I drove in, I saw this beautiful message on the board. I said to my wife, I got to go up and read that again. It's from Psalm 139. It says, "For you formed my inward parts, you covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works. And that my soul knows very well, my frame was not hidden from you." Wonderfully made, fearfully and wonderfully made. Do you know you were fearfully and wonderfully made? If you want proof as a reminder, get a chance to meet Grace in the back. Look at Grace. She is wonderfully made, absolutely beautiful. And so are each and every of you. And the writer of this psalm, David, he's saying, hey, I know you knitted me together in my mother's womb. Now, I say that to you because to any Christian, you could use this who is considering abortion, you could use this verse to show the viability of life. And you should know this verse because the largest portion of people in this country that get abortions today are Christian. That is a sad, sad affair. I also put part of the blame on that number on the churches themselves for a number of reasons. They won't talk about the issue of life from the pulpit. I was involved in a pastoral lunch up in Washtenaw County where a bunch of pastors got together in a right to life get together, and they invited pastors from all denominations and everything else, and one pastor says, I won't discuss this, it's too political. It is political, but Jesus was political, wasn't he? If you don't believe it, read the words in red in your Bible. He was. So that's one place where the church falls short. When I say the church, I'm not talking about Christ Church. I'm talking about the local churches around that are too afraid to handle topics like this. Another way I another way I say the church is falling short is they forget we have a loving and forgiving God. And young ladies in the church, when they get pregnant, they're chastised, they're looked down upon, they are not accepted, and they forget that we have a loving and forgiving God. And so much pressure is put on them by their church and by their parents because they made a mistake that they're afraid to tell their parents or their pastor because they forgot we have a loving and forgiving Father. And if they could go and talk to their parents, if they could go and talk to their pastor, they might be able to hear that verse I just read. They might be able to be counseled. But through all this, at least the Christians that have the abortions understand one thing: life is not irrelevant. It's not. And that's always been the question. The other part of the world that we have fighting for, I remember growing up in Canada when Roe v. Wade was passed. It was big news even in Canada. I did not hear the following statement until I moved in my senior year in high school over here. In a public school, a teacher said, it's nothing more than just a little bundle of cells. There's no life. And I realized at that point in the schools in this country, our kids were being taught the idea that that child in the womb is not life, it's just a bundle of cells. There is an acronym, and I made sure I wrote it down on my phone properly, and I want you guys to remember this because there are a lot of people that will argue with you that are not Christians, that you're trying to force your religion on them. Normally, when I talk to people about the issue of abortion, I make it clear I will not bring up my faith to them until the very end and only with their permission. That I'll only discuss from a moral and ethical point of view. And so let me give you that acronym. And some of you, I know Kara, and I know Cam, and Phil probably all know this, but I'm going to share it with you. Most of you already know it. You got an acronym. It's SLED. And I use this model whenever I'm discussing the child because the question comes up and should be, when does life begin? Now, the discussion, I couldn't have this discussion with the other person that said life is irrelevant. To me, that is such a psychotic or sociopath answer. Life is irrelevant on this. But it's very relevant. Because if life is relevant and that child is alive, then that child must have human rights. Agreed? So the question is, when is life viable? Some people will say, oh, it's just a tiny little bundle of cells. Size. Baby, it's just a little tiny thing, no bigger than a bean. Size doesn't matter. That is an arbitrary statement. Pastor Phil and I were younger. There was a song that came out that said, short people have no reason to live. What is too small or too big? What constitutes, all of a sudden, what constitutes how big is big enough to live? Size really is not, nor should ever be, a point of viability. It's too small. Go up to the University of Michigan Medical Library or pull their book offline on embryology. Inside every one of their books on embryology, it all says the same thing from the zygote all the way up to the fetus. It makes the same statements, whether it be about the fetus or the zygote. They're babies. You see, we use these technical terms to dehumanize. But in the books, it makes a statement. This is a human in the earliest stage of development. A human. So if that child is a human in the earliest stage of development, should it be afforded human rights? But some people argue that the size is the determining factor. The L. Excuse me if I'm not spelling well, I'm not an English professor. Level of development. It's not fully developed. At which point, because, like I said, the books of embryology say that we're a human in the earliest forms of development. Their argument is, hey, there's a level of development that becomes viable. Had a young lady tell me that as long as the child, and we're going to get into the, you'll hear this statement a couple of times, as long as the child is dependent on the parent for survival, it's not viable. Show me a teenager today that could survive without mom making lunch. I know some 30-year-olds living in their mom's basement that have not become to that point. They're dependent because of development, and we'll get into more of that when we get down to dependency. But level of development. Do you know when a child is born, at the immediate time that the sperm hits the egg and it divides, do you understand that that zygote has every chromosome, every DNA molecule? It has its own DNA. Its very own DNA. It doesn't have just mom or just dad's. That child at conception has its own DNA that is very specific to that child and has everything there needed to create a 90-year-old person. Everything is there. When the child is in the womb, it does not go through an assembly line. Today, we'll attach the feet. Tomorrow, the hands. Yeah.
A good way to put that is, there is no new information in the DNA added. It's all already there.
Right.
There's no more, it doesn't further develop. There's no new data information in the DNA. It's all there.
You are in a constant, till the day you die, believe it or not, you are in a constant state of development. Trust me. I am going through a stage in my life, I'm growing hair where I never expected to, and I'm losing hair where I shouldn't. I got hair growing out of my ears and everything else. That just is part of the human development as you go on. You're in a constant state of development until you pass. So it's a very arbitrary statement. Level of development. Where do you start that development? Right from the beginning, you have your own DNA and everything is there. For that to be a child sitting next to his mother in church or running outside and playing hide and seek with their friends. Everything is there and ready to go. The next one. Environment. Where is it? As long as it's in the mother's womb, it's not viable. Therefore, should be able to be aborted at any time, is the argument. After it passes through the birth canal, it's viable. But as long as it's inside the mother's womb, it's not. What makes that child, less of a human while in the womb than it is just a little bit after? I would say a few minutes afterwards, but some women it takes a lot more time than a few minutes to go from the womb to outside the womb. It's a short trip, but sometimes it takes longer. But in that short trip, what makes that child more or less viable? There are laws in states right now that state if the child was attempted to be aborted from the mother's womb and it comes out living, it's okay to walk away and provide no additional support to that child. That's infanticide. Yeah.
Maryland is trying to pass a law that allows you to abort the child up to 28 days after birth.
Mm-hmm.
California is trying to follow suit.
Yes. And I'm surprised they're only going 28 days because they're basing this off of a bioethicist by the name of Peter Singer out of Princeton University, who says that a chicken deserves more rights than you. He's an animal rights activist. I believe he belongs to PETA and a bunch of other stuff. However, with children, he says, his statement is they're not viable until they're 18 months old. Out of the womb. 18 months. Because, and that gets us into the last one, degree of dependency. Dependency, A-N-C-Y or E-N-C-Y? Huh. We're going with E-N-C-Y. Again, I'm not an English professor. Degree of dependency. As long as the child is dependent on the parent for its survival, it is not viable. Takes me back to my earlier statement. Who here has young kids that would survive without their parents?
I often wonder if my husband.
And that's probably, I don't know him, but if he's anything like me, it's probably a fair statement. If he's like me, I can say it is a fair statement. Not knowing him, I can't say that about him. Level of dependency. Right now, again, they're stating if a child, this is Peter Singer's point, if the child is still dependent on the parents, it's not viable. And a child can't be viable, it can't be free from dependency from the parents until about 18 months of age. Yeah, Galen.
You know, that also leads to elder murder.
Yes, it does, and I'm getting to that, thank you. We're getting to that. Here's how viable, and everything that you, please remember SLED. Because it completely, the answers will completely show their view on life overall. In these arguments, what you will find to those who support abortion, that outside of the womb, because of dependency, somebody with Alzheimer's, or somebody with dementia, or somebody with mental illness, or a handicap, thank you. Peter Singer would argue that if someone has Down syndrome, that it would be okay to take their life outside of the womb at any point. Scary. Galen and I knew a family, gentleman had Down syndrome and cerebral palsy. One child had Down syndrome, the other one had cerebral palsy. According to Peter Singer, both of them should be able to be terminated outside of the womb because their degree of dependency was too high on the parents. Yeah.
And I think it's California, but they're allowing what they call partial birth abortion.
Oh, that's not just California. That's not just California. California just tried to pass a law that would allow abortion after the birth.
This is during birth.
No, partial birth is more widespread than just California. That's the point I'm making. California just tried to pass an infanticide bill. To my understanding, it hasn't passed as of yet, but they're struggling to pass it. But yeah, partial birth abortion has been a big thing. As long as any part of that body is inside the mother, you can terminate. And that's based on the dependency issue. Every one of those points is arbitrary. And you can carry every one of those points outside the womb. This is why life matters. Is because each and every one of those children were made in the image of God. They're image bearers. That gentleman who said, is life irrelevant, or life is irrelevant. He didn't say if. The question of life is irrelevant. That is scary. And he proceeded to ask me, doesn't an animal, or should an animal have the same rights as a human? Now, I weighed out his question, and his question was a trick question, because no matter how you answered it, he would try to make it in his favor. And I knew that. And I said, I'm going to answer the question, but you're not going to like the way I answer the question. The answer is this. Animals are not made in God's image. His question was a straw man argument. There's no relevancy. And he figured because a kangaroo trying to evade a predator could abort the child in the womb or in his pouch for its own salvation. But we're not kangaroos. We are humans, and we're made in the image of God. And we need to remember that. Little Grace in the back is made in the image of God. God is really beautiful.
It's just sad that the same people that celebrate the murdering of babies and the will be fit to be tied if you abort the puppies or the dogs.
Yeah, and Peter Singer would be one of those, by the way.
Just a way to remember SLED is their argument is all sleds only go downhill. Where that leads.
Yep.
When you disrespect life, this is why we have rampant murderers and people killing each other is more so now than ever is the disrespect for life itself, God's creation.
Yeah. I was involved in a study. I've got 5 minutes left. Good. I was involved in a study at the Jackson prison where we were interviewing children that were tried as adults and where they were at in their sentencing. And I had a chance to get to know over the weeks a young man who has no regret for his crime. None. He doesn't even understand why he was tried for what he did. He thinks he was tried for silliness. That was his words. I was tried for silliness. He says, I was tried for just doing what I was entitled to do. His words. Let me tell you what he did, that he could not understand why he was in the penitentiary. He had a good friend of his best friend. His best friend's parents just got him a really nice pair of Air Jordans. His friend says, I want those, give them to me. His friend said, no. So the boy shot him and killed him and took the shoes. What's that? So, we don't care about life so much. And it's getting to the point where when it comes to the life of the child, that society is trying to make it now that the question of life is irrelevant. That gentleman I talked to is not alone. Because all of a sudden, if you make life irrelevant, none of this matters. Just life doesn't matter. What you desire for your rights, what you desire for your will, that's what's important. We must, when we discuss with people, we must always keep life in the forefront because you'll be having that so much. I am so thankful and I give praise to God for him allowing places like Selah and like to be around to help young ladies bring forth such beautiful children. But there's a movement out there that's trying to destroy them. And we have to be ready to give answers. This is one tool. But your biggest tool that's going to be in your arsenal for this is prayer. You pray before you talk to them. You pray during the time you're talking to them. And remember, the one thing this takes out is if you're talking to someone who doesn't want you to talk about their religion. During this argument, I can make an argument on every one of those based on morals and ethics and without bringing up religion one time. Now, the guy I talked to the other night says, oh, all morals and ethics, they derive from religion and they're just pushed and everything else. So basically, the way I'm taking it is he has no place in his life for morals or ethics either. And this is what we are building in, and he tried to justify it. Live in a society without morals and ethics. I can have this conversation without them once saying, you're trying to force your religion on me. To a believer, Psalm 139. To an unbeliever, SLED. What? Someone had a question? Oh.
Could you touch on how this all relates to a woman who was raped and is pregnant?
Oh, great question. The question is how does all this relate to somebody who's been raped or involved in a case of incest. That is,
With 2 minutes, so you know.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it because I know how to ignore the clock. Rape and incest are terrible, evil, awful things that create a victim out of the woman. And we cannot deny the fact that this causes a whole bunch of internal conflict and everything else. But we cannot make 2 victims out of it. And by killing the child, because the evil of what one man did doubles his evil. And we have to, I can't imagine going through that and having to go through that decision. But the answer is this: we cannot create 2 victims out of this. Even more, I can't imagine my life without my daughters, right? The children are going to impact other people's lives. And when you take that child, you have now taken away the impact that they will make on other people's lives also. So in that, you create a bunch of little victims. But a child taken because of abortion or because of rape or incest is creating 2 victims of a very heinous crime. Let's not give the rapist the satisfaction of having more victims.
And I would say that her suffering would be a whole lot more if she went through that abortion.
There's a young lady,
Lifetime decision that she got to make.
there was a young lady that went to seminary with me. My wife and I had a chance to hear her speak. She was born due to a case of rape and incest. And her mother says that that child is her greatest gift. She was pushed into having an abortion. She even made it to the abortion clinic and changed her mind. And now she says her child is her greatest gift. And I got to know her child, and she is a wonderful Christian sister who speaks in a lot of places about the importance on that very question. What about the child that was conceived in rape or incest? But then again, we live in a society where some people want to stigmatize someone who's been raped or incest. Blame it on the woman. So you just eliminate the whole situation through an abortion. Seems easy, but it's a child. On that note, I went 30 seconds over. Thank you, Cam, for pointing that out. Real quick, any other questions or comments?
Just one you mentioned early on that, how religious people particularly frown upon, their daughters and stuff getting pregnant at a young age. And that causes a lot of problems in itself. But all we have to do is look at what Jesus would say to those holier than thou people that would look down on the young girl. He would say, which one of you is without sin? Cast the first stone.
Right.
And, they're all hypocrites. They all don't have any sin of their own. But when somebody else has some, they're quick to point it out. And that's just the way we are. Same is true with, homosexuality and all these other sins. These are sins. Which one of us doesn't have it? None of us. So
I would thank you for that. And I'm going to end it with this. By the way, there's a lot more Bible verses and stuff, and I wish I could have I could have lecture on this for hours, and I'm sure you're glad I didn't. But I will say this. I make a promise at the beginning when I have this sled conversation with people that I will not bring up my faith until the end. And almost, not 100% of the time, but almost always I say, well, you said you were going to bring up your faith at the end. What are you going to do? What are you going to say? And this is my answer to them. If you've had an abortion, or you participated in having an abortion, or you caused somebody else to have an abortion, remember that I believe in a very loving and forgiving God. And I give them the gospel. My point on faith in this thing is that Jesus died for sinners. And he loved the sinner so much that he died for him. With that, Pastor, will you close in prayer?
Great God, we just thank you for the gift of life. You're the author of it, and we just choose to, as followers of your name and those that would inherit salvation, we want to respect what you've created in life, and we just pray that you'd help us to be lights in this dark world. We know what the plans of the evil one are, and he's on his heels with the Supreme Court decision here in this country, and he's got his minions out in number. So we just thank you for this opportunity that we have in this country to return a bit to our foundings, at least at the federal level, and we pray that you'll help us to be part of that. And we just thank you for all of our mothers.
Yes, Lord.
And all the women in general that are, without them, we have no society.